At his 7th birthday party, my grandson whispered what my daughter says when she thinks I'm not listening. "Nana, Mommy says you're so rich and she can't wait for you to die." My daughter thought she was just waiting for an inheritance. I left her party early, made one phone call, and activated a protocol that moved my entire fortune into a charitable foundation, leaving her with a legacy of honor instead of a payday. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Dr. Eleanor Hayes. For 40 years, I held the chair of the African American Literature Department at Spelman College. My life has been a long, quiet, and deeply satisfying conversation with the great minds of our past. With Baldwin, with Hurston, with Morrison. I am a woman who believes in the power of a well-structured narrative, and I have learned that the most important truths are often found not in the bold pronouncements, but in the subtle subtext, in the things left unsaid. At 72, my life is a curated collection of these truths, housed in a beautiful, book-filled Victorian home in Atlanta's Inman Park, a place of quiet, intellectual grace. To my daughter, Tiffany, and her husband, Robert, I am a quaint and slightly pitiable figure. I am the professor, a woman whose wealth is measured in first editions and academic accolades, not in stock portfolios. They believe I am living comfortably, but modestly, on a professor's pension and the modest life insurance policy left by my late husband. They see my quiet, intellectual life as a gentle, respectable slide into irrelevance. They are wrong. This perception is a carefully maintained fiction, a long-term character study I have been conducting for the better part of a decade. My considerable wealth, a fortune that would shock them to their core, did not come from my academic salary. It came from a series of shrewd, early investments my husband and I made decades ago, in the nascent worlds of tech and Atlanta real estate. We were quiet investors, guided by our brilliant financial advisor, Frank Moss. We bought land when it was cheap and stock when it was a gamble. And we won. Big. When my husband passed, he left me not just a widow, but the sole, silent custodian of a vast fortune. I told no one. I changed nothing about my life. I continued to teach. I continued to live in my comfortable, but not ostentatious, home. I did this for one reason. I wanted to see the true character of my only child. I wanted to know if she loved me, Eleanor Hayes, the mother, the intellectual, the woman, or if she was simply waiting for the death of the wealthy matriarch she had no idea I was. The data I have collected over the years has been consistent, and it has been heartbreaking. Today, at my grandson's 7th birthday party, I have a feeling the final, conclusive results of my experiment are about to be delivered. The party is being held at my daughter's home, a sprawling, glass and marble monolith in the heart of Buckhead, a neighborhood that prides itself on its aggressive, unapologetic wealth. The house is less a home and more a statement, a testament to my son-in-law Robert's success as a plastic surgeon and Tiffany's success as the wife of a plastic surgeon. Today, the house is a stage for a performance of extravagant, competitive parenting. The theme of my grandson Jamal's 7th birthday party is a safari adventure. This does not mean a few animal print balloons and a pin the tail on the donkey game. It means a live animal petting zoo on the perfectly manicured lawn, complete with a baby giraffe. It means a professional magician in a pith helmet, a custom-built jungle bouncy castle, the size of a small house, and a catering staff serving champagne to the adults and mocktails to the children. The price of this one-day event, I calculate, would have funded a full year of my graduate studies. I see Tiffany gliding through the crowd of Atlanta's social elite, her smile a bright, brittle thing. She is in her element, accepting compliments on the party, laughing a little too loudly, her eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing, comparing, competing. She is not celebrating her son. She is curating an experience, producing an event, and the primary product being sold is her own impeccable taste and social standing. She spots me near the French doors leading to the patio and breezes over. "Mother, there you are," she says, kissing the air near my cheek. "Isn't it all just fabulous?" I told Robert, if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. The Blackwells are here. You know he's on the board at the High Museum. Ah. She looks me up and down, her eyes taking in my simple, elegant linen dress. It is a look I know well, a quick, dismissive appraisal that finds me wanting. "That's a sweet dress, mother," she says, the word sweet, a synonym for quaint and irrelevant. "Did you get it at one of those little shops in Virginia Highland?" "I've had it for years, Tiffany," I say, my voice calm. "You know I don't care for fast fashion." "Of course," she says with a tight, pitying smile. She then turns to her husband, who has joined us. "Robert, darling, don't you think mother looks tired? We really must convince her to sell that big, drafty old house in Inman Park and move into a nice, manageable condo, something with a concierge." Robert, a man whose charm is as smooth and superficial as the veneers on his teeth, puts an arm around my shoulder. "Now, Tiffany, you know your mother is attached to her books and her history," he says, his tone one of benevolent, condescending amusement. He is playing the part of the reasonable, caring son-in-law, but the message is the same. My life, my home, my values, they are all things to be managed, to be dealt with, to be gently but firmly pushed aside to make way for their own glittering, modern world. They see me as a problem to be solved, a sweet but slightly burdensome relic whose eventual, inevitable decline they will have to graciously manage. They have no idea that the woman they are trying to move into a manageable condo could buy and sell their entire, glass and marble world without even noticing the dip in her portfolio. The one, true and uncomplicated joy in this performative high-gloss world is my grandson, Jamal. He is a sweet, sensitive, and deeply observant child, a small island of authenticity in a sea of his parents' social striving. He finds me on the patio, where I have retreated from the overwhelming noise of the party. He runs to me, his face alight with a pure, unadulterated happiness that is a stark contrast to the strained, competitive smiles of the adults around him. He throws his arms around my waist. "Nana," he says, his voice muffled against my dress. "You came." "Of course I came, my sweet boy," I say, hugging him tightly. "I wouldn't miss your birthday for the world." He pulls back, his eyes shining. "Did you bring it?" he whispers, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. I smile. "I did." I hand him the gift I have brought. It is not a large, flashy toy wrapped in garish paper. It is a small, heavy, rectangular package, wrapped in simple, brown craft paper and tied with a piece of twine. He takes it with a reverence that is almost comical in a 7-year-old. He sits down on the flagstone patio and carefully unwraps it. Inside is a book, a vintage 1950s first edition of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, with its original, beautiful illustrations. I had found it at a rare book fair last year and had been saving it for this birthday. Jamal and I have been reading the series together, and he is completely captivated by the world of Narnia. He opens the book, his small fingers tracing the old, illustrated map of Narnia on the inside cover. He looks up at me, his eyes wide with a wonder that is more valuable than all the diamonds in Buckhead. "It's the real one, Nana," he breathes. "It's the real Narnia." "It is," I say. "A little piece of it, just for you." He hugs the book to his chest as if it were a holy relic. "This is our bond." It is a bond built not on extravagant parties or expensive toys, but on stories, on imagination, on a shared love for worlds that exist beyond the material. I have nurtured his mind, his curiosity, his soul. His parents have nurtured his social calendar. Tiffany appears at the French doors, her eyes scanning the patio. She sees us, and her smile tightens. "Jamal, honey," she calls out, her voice a little too bright. "Come on, it's time to open your other presents. The Blackwells just gave you a remote control drone that's bigger than you are." Jamal looks from his mother's insistent face to the book in his hands. He gives me a small, secret, apologetic look. He knows, even at 7, that he is being pulled between two different worlds, two different value systems. "Go on, sweet boy," I say softly. "We can read the first chapter later." He gets up and runs to his mother, but he is still clutching the old, worn book to his chest. He has not abandoned it for the promise of the bigger, flashier toy. And it is in this small, quiet act of loyalty that the seed of the day's devastating revelation is sown. He loves me. He trusts me. And he is about to share a secret that he is too innocent to understand, a secret that will shatter my world and, in doing so, set me free. The moment of the great, unintended revelation came an hour later. The grand spectacle of the gift opening was over. Jamal was surrounded by a mountain of plastic and cardboard, a testament to his parents' social connections and their belief in the transitive power of expensive things. He had been polite, he had said his thank yous, but I had seen his eyes keep flicking back to the small, brown paper-wrapped book that he had carefully placed on a chair, away from the chaos. The party had moved into its next phase. The children were being entertained by the magician, their shrieks of delight, a high-pitched counterpoint to the low, confident murmur of the adults' conversations. I had found a quiet armchair in a corner of the vast living room, a small, peaceful eddy in the social current. Jamal, having escaped the forced merriment of the magic show, came to find me. He was still clutching his new, old book. He climbed into my lap, a thing he was getting almost too big to do, and settled in with a contented sigh. "Nana," he said, his voice a small, quiet thing in the noisy room. "Can we read now?" "Of course, my love," I said, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. I opened the book to the first page. Chapter 1. Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. We read for a few minutes, our two heads bent over the book, the world of the party fading away as we stepped into the snowy landscape of Narnia. It was a perfect, stolen moment of peace. Then Jamal leaned his head against my shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, and I thought perhaps he was just sleepy from the excitement of the day. But then he spoke, his voice a soft, innocent whisper, his words meant only for me. "Nana," he breathed, his small, warm breath against my ear. "Mommy says you're so rich." I froze, my own breath catching in my throat. I did not know they even spoke of me in those terms. He continued, his voice a simple, uninflected recitation of something he had overheard. "And she says she can't wait for you to die." The words, spoken in the sweet, innocent voice of my own grandson, were a physical blow. It was as if the air had been sucked from my lungs, as if the world had suddenly, silently, gone out of focus. I could feel the blood drain from my face. He wasn't finished. He added a final, childishly confusing, and utterly damning detail. "Then," he whispered, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to remember the exact words. "Then she said we can get a bigger TV for the playroom." And there it was. The entire ugly, sordid truth of my daughter's heart, distilled into a single, devastatingly innocent sentence. It was not a childish misunderstanding. It was a direct quote, a verbatim report from the front lines of her parents' private conversations. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were already spending the money. They were planning their upgrades. My death was not a future sorrow to be mourned. It was a future transaction to be eagerly anticipated. The little boy in my lap had no idea of the profound, catastrophic nature of the words he had just spoken. He was simply sharing a piece of information, a piece of grown-up talk that had stuck in his curious, 7-year-old mind. He had delivered a death sentence to my illusions, and he had done it with the gentle, unknowing hand of a child. In the seconds that followed Jamal's whisper, a silent, violent war was waged within me. One part of me, the grandmother, the mother, the woman who had loved this child and his mother with every fiber of her being, simply shattered. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice plunged directly into my heart. It was a grief so profound, so absolute, it threatened to consume me, to bring me to my knees right there in the middle of the crowded, laughing party. But another part of me, the part that was Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the scholar, the analyst, the woman who had spent a lifetime studying narratives, took control. This part of me was not emotional. It was clinical. It recognized Jamal's words for what they were, the final, irrefutable data point in a long and painful experiment. For years, I had been observing, gathering evidence, trying to diagnose the sickness in my daughter's soul. And now, her own child had just handed me the final, conclusive lab result. The diagnosis was terminal. My external reaction was a masterpiece of control, a performance of grace honed over a lifetime of navigating the subtle cruelties of the world. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I did not allow a single flicker of the devastation that was raging within me to show on my face. Instead, I tightened my arms around my grandson. I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head, burying my face for a moment in the sweet, boyish scent of his hair. The hug was not just for him, it was for me. It was a way to steady myself, to anchor myself in the one, true, and innocent love that remained in this hollow, gilded house. I pulled back and looked him in the eye, and I summoned a smile from some deep, hidden reserve of strength I did not know I possessed. "Oh, my sweet boy," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of warm, grandmotherly amusement. "Grown-up talk is so silly, isn't it? Sometimes we say the silliest things." I had to protect him. I had to ensure that he would never, ever know the devastating impact of the words he had just so innocently delivered. He was not a messenger, he was a child, and he would not be made to carry the weight of this adult ugliness. I gave him one last, tight squeeze. "Why don't you go see if the magician can teach you a trick?" I said, my voice still light, still steady. "I think I'm going to sit here for a minute and rest my old bones." He scrambled off my lap, his mission accomplished, his secret shared, and ran back into the fray of the party, the weight of his words lifted from his small shoulders and transferred, in its entirety, to mine. I sat there, in my quiet corner, the book still open in my lap, my smile frozen on my face. I was a perfect portrait of a serene, loving grandmother, but on the inside, a revolution was taking place. The 46-year-old bond between me and my daughter, a bond that had been fraying for years, had just, in that single, whispered moment, been irrevocably and permanently severed. The experiment was over, the data was in, and the time for quiet, passive observation had just come to a definitive and very final end. The time for action was about to begin. I sat in the armchair for another 10 minutes, a statue of serene composure, allowing the initial, seismic shock to subside and the cold, clear, and unfamiliar landscape of my new reality to settle. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache beneath my ribs, but it was now overlaid with a new, hard, and strangely empowering emotion: resolve. The question was no longer if I would act, but how. My first act was a simple one: escape. I could not remain in this house, in this atmosphere of glittering falsehood, for a moment longer. I could not look at my daughter's smiling, treacherous face. I could not listen to my son-in-law's charming, empty laughter. I needed to be in my own space, my own sanctuary, where I could think, and plan, and begin to construct my response. I closed the book in my lap, placed it carefully on the side table, and stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate, and graceful. I was not fleeing. I was making a strategic retreat. I found Tiffany in the center of the living room, holding court with the Blackwells, the couple from the High Museum. She was in her element, her laughter a bright, tinkling sound, her gestures animated. She was performing the role of the perfect hostess, the queen of Buckhead society. I waited for a pause in their conversation and then stepped forward, my own expression one of polite, maternal regret. "Tiffany, darling," I said, my voice quiet but clear, just loud enough to interrupt. She turned to me, her smile faltering slightly, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes at being pulled away from her important guests. "Mother, what is it?" "I'm so sorry to do this," I said, placing a hand gently on my chest in a gesture of faint distress. "But I'm not feeling very well. A bit of a headache. I think the excitement of the day has been a little too much for me. I'm going to have to leave a little early." Her reaction was the final, damning confirmation I needed. A concerned daughter would have shown alarm. She would have asked if I was all right, if I needed anything, if she should call a doctor. Tiffany's face, however, showed only one, unmistakable emotion: relief. A barely concealed, almost joyful relief. The burdensome, old-fashioned mother was leaving the party early. The one, dissonant note in her perfect symphony was removing herself. "Oh, of course, Mother," she said, her voice dripping with a false, solicitous sympathy. "You absolutely must go and rest. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll have the driver take you home right away." She did not offer to take me herself. She did not suggest that Marcus or Robert should. She delegated the task, as she did with all unpleasantries, to the hired help. She turned to her husband. "Robert, darling, would you call the driver for my mother?" "Of course, my love," he said, already pulling out his phone, his own expression, one of polite, but complete, disinterest in my well-being. I said my goodbyes to the Blackwells. I found Jamal and gave him one last, fierce hug, whispering in his ear that he was my favorite part of the whole day. Then, I allowed Tiffany to guide me to the door, her hand on my arm, a gesture not of support, but of a firm, polite escort off the premises. As I stepped out into the warm Atlanta evening to wait for the car, I knew that I was not just leaving a party, I was leaving a life. I was walking away from a 46-year-old relationship that had just been revealed as a hollow, transactional sham. The door that closed behind me was not just the door to their house. It was the door to the past. And the car that was coming to collect me was not just taking me home. It was taking me to the first day of the rest of my life. A life in which my daughter's expectations and her inheritance were about to be radically and permanently revised. The car that arrived was, of course, a gleaming black Escalade, the official vehicle of the Buckhead elite. The driver, a kind, uniformed man who looked to be about my age, held the door for me with a gentle deference that was a stark contrast to the casual contempt I had just experienced inside the house. As I settled into the cool, quiet, leather-scented interior, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I was free. I had been liberated, not by my own choice, but by the brutal, clarifying honesty of a 7-year-old boy. The burden of pretending, of hoping, of trying to maintain a relationship that was a one-sided fiction, had been lifted. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the glittering, music-filled mansion behind. I did not look back. I looked forward, through the tinted windows, at the city lights beginning to blur past. My mind was no longer clouded with grief or hurt. It was a cold, clear, and furiously working machine. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I did not hesitate. I did not second-guess. I knew exactly who I needed to call. I dialed the number for Frank Moss. Frank was more than just my financial advisor. He was a relic from a better, more honorable time. He had been my late husband's best friend, his roommate at Morehouse, the best man at our wedding. He was a man of deep integrity, of fierce loyalty, and he was the only other person on the planet who knew the true, staggering extent of my wealth. He had helped my husband and me build our portfolio, and since my husband's death, he had been its faithful, vigilant guardian. He was also a man who had never, not once, trusted my daughter. He had seen the grasping, materialistic nature beneath her polished exterior from the very beginning. For years, he had been gently, but persistently, urging me to protect myself, to legally insulate my fortune from Tiffany's inevitable sense of entitlement. He answered on the second ring, his voice the familiar, warm, and deeply reassuring baritone of a man who has spent a lifetime being a rock in turbulent waters. "Eleanor," he said, "I was just thinking about you. How was the birthday party?" "The party was very illuminating, Frank," I said, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of all emotion. He caught the tone immediately. The warmth in his voice was replaced by a quiet, focused seriousness. "Okay," he said. "What happened?" I did not tell him the details. I did not tell him the exact heartbreaking words my grandson had spoken. The wound was too raw, too personal, and he did not need the emotional details. He only needed the final, operational conclusion. "The experiment is over, Frank," I said. "The final data has been collected and analyzed, and the hypothesis has been confirmed." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. It was not a silence of surprise. It was a silence of grim, sorrowful vindication. He had been right all along. "I see," he said, his voice a low, sad rumble. "I am so sorry to hear that, Eleanor. Truly." "I am not," I replied, and the words, as I spoke them, felt profoundly, shockingly true. "I am relieved. I am free. And I am ready to act. What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice shifting, becoming the sharp, strategic advisor I knew so well. "I need you to activate the legacy protocol. I said, using the code name we had developed years ago for this very contingency. Effective immediately. All of it. Another pause, this one shorter, sharper. He was processing the magnitude of my instruction. The legacy protocol was not a small adjustment to my estate plan. It was a complete and total restructuring. It was a financial declaration of war. All of it? He confirmed, his voice now tight with a new, focused energy. The liquidation, the trust formation, the revision of the will? You're sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Frank, I said. My daughter is waiting for me to die. I think it's time I showed her what I intend to do while I'm still very much alive. Consider it done, Eleanor, he said, and I could hear the grim, righteous satisfaction in his voice. I'll get the team started first thing Monday morning. The gears will be in motion before she's even finished writing the thank you notes for the party. I ended the call. I leaned my head back against the cool leather of the seat and watched the city lights stream by. The decision was made. The order was given. The quiet, unassuming retired professor was about to become a philanthropist of a scale that would stun the entire city of Atlanta. And my daughter, who was so eagerly anticipating my death, was about to receive a formal, and very public, notification that she had just been completely, and irrevocably, disinherited from a fortune she never even knew existed. The legacy protocol was not a single document, but a complex, multi-stage estate planning strategy that Frank and I had developed over the past 5 years. It was born out of my growing unease about Tiffany's character and Frank's persistent, lawyerly insistence on protecting my assets. It was, in essence, a financial doomsday device, designed to be activated by a single, simple command from me. Its purpose was twofold. First, to move the vast majority of my wealth into a structure that was legally untouchable by any heir, and second, to create a new, powerful, and very public legacy for myself, a legacy that would completely overshadow the one my daughter was so eagerly waiting to inherit. The protocol was a testament to Frank's brilliance as a financial strategist, and to my own, quiet, academic understanding of how institutions are built and how narratives are shaped. It was designed to be executed swiftly, silently, and with the force of an avalanche. The first stage was the liquidation. This was the most straightforward, yet most critical, part of the plan. Upon my command, Frank's team was authorized to begin the immediate, systematic liquidation of a specific, pre-identified 75% of my investment portfolio. This was not a simple matter of selling a few stocks. It was a massive, coordinated sale of diverse assets, blue-chip stocks, tech sector mutual funds, real estate investment trusts, and corporate bonds. The goal was to convert these long-term, paper assets into a single, massive pool of liquid cash. This process, Frank had estimated, would take approximately 1 week and would generate a cash sum in the high 8 figures. The second stage was the formation. This was the heart of the protocol. The massive pool of cash generated by the liquidation was not to be deposited into my personal bank account. Instead, it was to be used as the initial, and sole, funding for a new, legally ironclad, and irrevocable charitable foundation. The foundation had already been legally structured, its charter drafted, its board of trustees consisting of me, Frank, and the president of Spelman College, already designated. All it needed was the funding to be officially born. The name of the foundation was a piece of quiet, academic, and deeply passive-aggressive genius on my part. It was to be called the Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation for the Arts and Humanities. I had used their names, the names of my treacherous daughter and her complicit husband. I had tied their family name, the name they were so proud of, to a philanthropic legacy they would have absolutely no control over. They would be forced to watch as their own name became synonymous with a generosity that was the antithesis of their own greedy, grasping nature. The third and final stage was the revision. This was the legal kill shot. Simultaneous to the funding of the foundation, a new last will and testament for me, which had been drafted years ago and was sitting in Frank's safe, would be formally executed and notarized. This new will was a simple, brutal, and elegant document. It would revoke all previous wills. It would acknowledge the existence of my daughter, Tiffany Hayes Blackwell, by name, so that she could not later contest the will by claiming she had been accidentally omitted. And it would bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate, my house, my personal belongings, and the remaining 25% of my investment portfolio directly and irrevocably to the newly formed Hayes Blackwell Family Foundation. The protocol was a perfect three-stage trap. It was designed to be irreversible. Once the foundation was funded, the money was legally no longer mine. It belonged to the charitable entity. It could not be sued for. It could not be claimed in probate court. It was gone. My daughter's inheritance, the fortune she was so eagerly anticipating, would have been, in the space of a single week, legally and permanently vaporized and reformed into a monument to her own greed. On Monday morning, while Tiffany was likely recovering from her extravagant party and basking in the afterglow of her social triumph, Frank Moss and his team at Moss Wealth Management initiated the first stage of the legacy protocol. The atmosphere in their quiet, glass-walled offices in downtown Atlanta was not one of panic, but of focused, almost military precision. They were executing a plan they had rehearsed and refined for years. The liquidation was a carefully coordinated, multi-front operation. Frank, a man who commanded immense respect in the financial community, made a series of quiet, discreet calls to his high-level contacts at major brokerage firms and investment banks. These were not frantic, sell everything orders. They were calm, professional directives to begin the orderly, phased sale of the assets held in the Eleanor Hayes portfolio. The first assets to be sold were the blue-chip stocks, the solid, dependable pillars of my portfolio. Shares in companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola, companies whose value was so stable that selling a large block of them would not cause a ripple in the market. The sell orders were executed electronically, the transactions taking place in the silent digital ether of the New York Stock Exchange. Millions of dollars of value, which had existed for years as numbers on a statement, were being converted into cold, hard, liquid cash. Next came the mutual funds, the large, diversified collections of assets that required a more delicate touch. Frank's team worked the phones, speaking to the fund managers, arranging for the redemption of my shares. It was a slower, more methodical process, a conversation of prospectuses and settlement dates. Each redeemed fund added another seven-figure sum to the growing pool of cash. The most complex part of the liquidation was the real estate investment trusts, or REITs. These were my shares in large-scale commercial properties, office buildings in Midtown Atlanta, shopping centers in the suburbs, apartment complexes all over the Southeast. Selling these required navigating a more complex set of market rules and regulations. But Frank's team was expert. They moved with a quiet, confident efficiency, untangling the legal knots and executing the sales with a surgeon's precision. As the week progressed, the numbers grew to a staggering scale. The cash account that Frank had set up for the transaction, an account that had started with a zero balance on Monday morning, began to swell. By Wednesday, it had crossed the $10 million mark. By Friday morning, it was approaching $25 million. I received a single, simple email update from Frank each evening. The emails contained no emotional language, no commentary. They were just a single, updated number, a quiet testament to the massive financial machinery that was now working on my behalf. I spent the week in a state of calm detachment. I went about my usual routine. I worked in my garden. I read. I visited a friend at the university. On the surface, nothing in my life had changed, but beneath the surface, a tectonic shift was occurring. The wealth that I had quietly, patiently accumulated over a lifetime was being gathered, concentrated, and prepared for its new and final purpose. Tiffany, I am sure, was oblivious. Her world was one of social calendars and school drop-off lines. The complex, invisible world of high finance was as foreign to her as a dead language. She had no idea that, in quiet offices just a few miles from her Buckhead mansion, her mother's name was the subject of a series of transactions that would have made the front page of the Wall Street Journal if they had been public. By Friday afternoon, it was done. Frank called me. "The liquidation is complete, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of awe. "The cash is settled. The foundation is ready to be born. The first and most critical stage of my quiet revolution was complete. The army had been mustered, the treasury was full, and the new queen was ready to be crowned. With the liquid assets secured, the second stage of the legacy protocol, the formation of the foundation, could begin. This was not a matter of market timing or financial negotiation. This was a matter of pure, elegant, and irreversible legal maneuvering. The charter documents for the foundation had been drafted by a team of the best philanthropic and estate lawyers in the state, a team assembled by Frank years ago. The documents had been sitting in his vault, a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. On that Friday afternoon, the giant awoke. The legal entity was officially and formally incorporated, the Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation for the Arts and Humanities. The name, my small, private, and deeply satisfying act of intellectual revenge, was now a matter of public record. It was a name designed to be a constant, public reminder to my daughter and her husband of the legacy they had forfeited. They would see their own name on the letterheads of grants, on the plaques of university buildings, on the programs of symphony orchestras, and they would know that they had no claim to it, no control over it. It was a gift of honor that they could not spend, a public association with a generosity they did not possess. The foundation's mission, as laid out in its charter, was a direct reflection of my own life's passions. It was dedicated to supporting the arts and humanities throughout the state of Georgia, with a special emphasis on African American literature and history. It would endow professorships at Spelman and Morehouse. It would provide scholarships for promising young writers and historians. It would fund acquisitions for local museums and archives. It was, in essence, a way for me to continue my life's work on a scale I had never imagined possible. The final step was the transfer of funds. With a series of swift, electronic wire transfers, the massive, multi-million-dollar pool of cash that had been generated by the liquidation was moved from the temporary holding account into the newly established endowment for the Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation. The transaction was seamless, silent, and, once completed, absolutely irreversible. The money was no longer mine. It did not belong to Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the private citizen. It now belonged to the foundation, a legally distinct, non-profit entity. It was protected by a fortress of philanthropic and tax law. It could not be touched by creditors. It could not be claimed by heirs. It could not be contested in probate court. It was, for all intents and purposes, gone. It had been transformed from a private fortune into a public trust. I received the confirmation from Frank via a secure email. It was a simple, scanned copy of the final wire transfer receipt. I looked at the number, at the long string of zeros, and I felt not a sense of loss, but a sense of profound, and deeply peaceful, completion. I had spent a lifetime accumulating that wealth, and in a single, quiet afternoon, I had given it all away. But it was not an act of surrender. It was an act of ultimate power. I had taken my legacy, the thing my daughter believed was a simple, transactional inheritance, and I had transformed it into something she could never touch, never control, and never, ever, understand. She was waiting for me to die so she could inherit my money. She had no idea that, in a legal and financial sense, her inheritance had already predeceased her. For a week, I let the silence sit. I allowed Tiffany and Robert to continue living in their gilded cage, completely unaware that the financial foundations of their future had been systematically and permanently dismantled. I gave them a week to enjoy their last few days of blissful, arrogant ignorance. Then, on the following Monday, it was time to inform them of the new reality. The summons was not a personal phone call. It was not an emotional confrontation. It was a cold, formal, and deeply intimidating letter, delivered by a professional courier to their Buckhead mansion. The letter was printed on the heavy, cream-colored letterhead of Moss Wealth Management, a name that commanded respect and connoted immense financial power in the city of Atlanta. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Tiffany Hayes Blackwell and Dr. Robert Blackwell. It was, as Frank had described it to me, a masterpiece of corporate speak, a document designed to be both polite and utterly terrifying. It began with a simple, professional salutation. It then stated its purpose. This letter is to formally request your mandatory attendance at a meeting to be held at our offices on Friday, October 28th, at 10:00 a.m. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss urgent and time-sensitive updates regarding the long-term estate planning and philanthropic structuring of our client, Dr. Eleanor Hayes. The language was carefully chosen. Mandatory attendance, urgent and time-sensitive, philanthropic structuring. These were the words of serious money, of high-stakes financial maneuvering. The letter continued. Dr. Hayes has recently executed a series of significant and irreversible financial decisions that will have a direct and material impact on her estate. As her sole heir, it is imperative that you are formally apprised of these changes. Please bring your legal counsel with you if you so choose. We look forward to seeing you on Friday. The letter was signed by Franklin Moss, his signature a confident, authoritative scrawl. I can picture the scene in their marble-floored foyer as they read it. They would have been, at first, confused. And then, a slow, dawning excitement would have taken over. They would not have seen the threat in the letter. They would have seen only the opportunity. Urgent and time-sensitive updates. To them, this could only mean one thing. The old woman was finally coming to her senses. She was probably ill. She was getting her affairs in order. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Significant and irreversible financial decisions. They would have interpreted this as the formal process of transferring assets, of setting up a trust in their name, of giving them control of the fortune they believed was rightfully theirs. Bring your legal counsel. This would have only confirmed their suspicions. This was a major, formal transaction, the kind that required lawyers. They would have seen the summons not as a threat, but as a royal invitation. An invitation to their own coronation. They would have spent the week in a state of giddy, triumphant anticipation. They would have called their own lawyer, a slick corporate attorney who was one of their country club friends. They would have discussed their plans for the money. A bigger house? A new jet for the plastic surgery practice? A summer home in the Hamptons? The possibilities were endless. They would have walked into Frank Moss's office on that Friday morning feeling like conquerors, ready to claim their spoils. They would be expecting a negotiation, a transfer of power, a massive payday. They had no idea they were walking into their own financial funeral. The meeting took place in the main boardroom at Moss Wealth Management, a room designed to communicate quiet, unshakable power. It was on the top floor of a skyscraper in Midtown, with a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The table was a single, massive slab of polished granite, surrounded by 20 leather chairs. Tiffany and Robert arrived with their lawyer, a man who looked more like a luxury car salesman than a legal professional. They were beaming, their faces alight with a greedy, triumphant excitement. They looked at me, seated at the far end of the table next to Frank, with a new proprietary air. I was no longer just their mother, I was their golden goose, and they were here to collect the eggs. Frank, in his role as the master of ceremonies, was the picture of grave, professional solemnity. He greeted them, offered them coffee, and directed them to their seats. "Thank you all for coming," he began, once they were settled. "We are here today, as my letter stated, to formally apprise you of some recent and significant changes to Dr. Hayes's estate." Tiffany could barely contain her excitement. "Frank, please," she said, her voice a purr. "There's no need for all this formality. We're all family here. Just tell us the good news." Frank's expression did not change. He simply slid a thick, beautifully bound document across the polished granite table towards them. "I believe this will answer all your questions," he said. Their lawyer picked up the document. He read the cover page, and a small, confused frown creased his brow. The Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation for the Arts and Humanities," he read aloud. "What is this? A new charity?" "It is," Frank confirmed, his voice a flat, neutral thing. "Dr. Hayes has decided to dedicate the majority of her resources to philanthropy. That document is the official charter for her new multi-million-dollar charitable foundation. It has been formally incorporated and fully funded as of last week. It is now the primary focus of her legacy." The smiles on Tiffany's and Robert's faces began to falter. This was not part of their script. That's very generous, Mother," Tiffany said, her voice strained. "But what does that have to do with the estate?" It has everything to do with it, Frank said. He then produced a second, slimmer document. It was my new will, signed, witnessed, and notarized. He handed it to their lawyer. If you will turn to Article 3, Frank instructed, you will find the primary bequest. The lawyer's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. He found the article and began to read it aloud, his voice a stunned, disbelieving monotone. I, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, being of sound mind and body, do hereby give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate, including all real and personal property and any and all financial assets, to the endowment of the Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation for the Arts and Humanities. He stopped, looking up in shock. Tiffany's face had gone completely white. But that's everything, she stammered. What about me? I'm her daughter. Ah, yes, Frank said, his voice as cold as the granite table. If you will continue reading the next clause, you will see that you are, in fact, mentioned by name. The lawyer, his face now pale, continued to read. To my daughter, Tiffany Hayes Blackwell, and her husband, Dr. Robert Blackwell, I bequeath my deepest and most sincere love. I also bequeath to them the distinct and lasting honor of having their family name associated with this philanthropic legacy, which will serve the community for generations to come. The room was utterly silent. The legal language was a masterpiece of passive aggression. I had not disinherited them. I had bequeathed them my love, and the honor of their own name. The lawyer flipped to the final page, searching for a loophole, a number, anything. There's nothing else, he whispered. There's no monetary value assigned. That is correct, Frank said. Their inheritance is an honor. It has no cash value. 1. The truth, in all its brutal, elegant finality, had been delivered. They had not been given a fortune. They had been made the namesakes of a fortune they would never, ever touch. The silence in the boardroom was a living, breathing thing. It was thick with the wreckage of my daughter's expectations. Tiffany stared at the documents on the table, her face a mask of chalky, slack-jawed disbelief. The triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by the dull, vacant stare of a person who has just witnessed a magic trick in which their own future has vanished into thin air. Robert, the plastic surgeon, looked as if he had been injected with a powerful paralytic. His charming, confident facade had completely collapsed, revealing the weak, terrified man beneath. He was a man who had built his entire life on a foundation of debt, a foundation he had been counting on my death to solidify. He had just been handed a notice of foreclosure from the one bank he thought he could always count on. It was Tiffany who finally broke the silence. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a shout. It was a low, trembling, and utterly defeated whisper. Why? She asked, looking at me for the first time not with contempt, but with a kind of raw, desperate confusion. Why would you do this? I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at my daughter, at the ruins of her arrogance, and I felt not a sense of triumph, but a great, weary sadness. You have been asking that question for your entire life, Tiffany, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final lecture. You have always wondered why I valued books over baubles, why I valued history over headlines. You see this as a punishment. It is not. It is a lesson. A final lesson in the meaning of the word legacy. I gestured to the charter of the foundation. You were waiting for me to die to receive your inheritance. But a true inheritance, a true legacy, is not something you wait for. It is something you build. It is the sum of your actions, the impact you have on the world. You and Robert have built a legacy of beautiful surfaces and hollow interiors. I have chosen to build something that will last. I walked to the door of the boardroom. Frank stood as I passed, giving me a small, respectful nod. You were so eager for me to die, I said, my hand on the doorknob, my back to them. You should know that, in a way, you got your wish. The mother you thought you had, the quiet, accommodating, and endlessly patient woman whose resources you were planning to plunder, she died at that birthday party. The woman who is leaving this room is someone else entirely, and she has her own plans. I walked out of the room and did not look back. The story concludes 6 months later. I am not in my quiet house in Inman Park. I am on the stage of the main auditorium at Spelman College, my alma mater. The room is filled with the bright, hopeful faces of students, faculty, and community leaders. This is the inaugural awards ceremony for the Hayes-Blackwell Family Foundation. I am at the podium, announcing the first class of scholarship recipients, 10 brilliant young women who will be able to pursue their dreams in literature, in history, in art, because of the foundation that now bears my daughter's name. I see a news camera in the back of the room. I know that Tiffany and Robert will see this on the evening news. They will see their name, attached to an act of generosity they cannot comprehend. They will see me, not as a grieving, lonely widow, but as a powerful, celebrated philanthropist, surrounded by a new generation of daughters, a new family of heirs who value me for my wisdom, not my wallet. My daughter was waiting for an inheritance of money. I gave her an inheritance of meaning, a legacy of honor she did not earn and cannot spend. And in doing so, I finally claimed my own true inheritance, a life of purpose, on my own terms, and the profound and deeply satisfying freedom of a story well and truly finished.